The mechanic said the engine was beyond repair, but the boy said, "Let me fix it." Robert Johnson took a deep breath and wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his oil-stained hand. His 25 years of experience as a mechanic had never failed him as much as they did at that moment. The engine of the blue Mustang in front of him was beyond saving, and he knew it. That's when he felt a small presence beside him. Looking down, he saw a boy of about 12, with messy blonde hair and a grey t-shirt already smudged with grease. "Mr. Rob, let me fix it," the boy said with a conviction that didn't match his age. Robert looked at Jason with a mix of affection and impatience. The son of Mrs. Miller, his neighbor for over 10 years, always showed up at the auto shop after school, curious about anything involving engines. "Jason, this engine's dead. There's no fixing it." Robert tried to be gentle but firm. "Go play outside, let Uncle work." The boy didn't move. His blue eyes shone with an odd determination as he studied the parts scattered across the workbench. Robert had taken nearly everything apart, searching for a solution that simply didn't exist. "I know you think I'm just bothering you, but I've been studying," Jason insisted. "My grandma needs this car to run." The mention of his grandmother made Robert pause. Grandma Betty was a 70-year-old woman who sold pastries at the weekend market. That Mustang was her only way to transport ingredients and set up her stall. Without it, she'd lose her only source of income. Robert sighed. He knew the family's situation well. Jason had lived with his grandma since he was little, after his parents split up and went their separate ways. The kid was too responsible for his age, always trying to help Grandma Betty however he could. "Look, Jason, I get that you want to help, but this isn't a game." Robert pointed at the engine. "The problem's in the block. It's cracked inside. There's no welding that back together." The boy stepped closer to the workbench and picked up one of the parts carefully. Robert was surprised by how delicately the kid handled the component, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. "My grandpa was a mechanic too," Jason said softly. "Before he left, he taught me some things." Robert knew the story. Jason's paternal grandfather had been a respected mechanic in town, but he disappeared when the boy was just 5. No one really knew what happened, only that he left one morning and never came back. "Jason, with all due respect to your grandpa, I've been working on cars for over 20 years. If I say it can't be fixed, it really can't." The boy set the part back down and looked Robert straight in the eye. "Have you tried the gradual cooling technique?" Robert froze. That term was specific, too technical for a kid Jason's age. It was an old method, barely known, one few mechanics could apply correctly. "Where'd you hear about that?" Robert asked, genuinely curious. "My grandpa left some notebooks with notes. I found them in Grandma Betty's attic last week. There's a lot I don't understand, but this technique was explained really clearly." Robert felt a chill. The gradual cooling technique was something he'd learned early in his career from a much older mechanic who had since passed away. It was a complicated, risky method, one few people knew. "Jason, this technique is dangerous. If it's done wrong, it could blow the whole engine." Robert tried to discourage him. "I know the risks. It's all written in the notebook, but it's the only chance we've got," the boy insisted. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot since we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Robert glanced at the clock on the auto shop wall. It was already past 6 in the evening, and he'd promised his wife he'd be home early for dinner with her and the kids. But something in the boy's voice made him hesitate. "All right, show me those notebooks." Robert finally gave in, though reluctantly. Jason dashed out of the shop and returned 15 minutes later with a plastic bag full of old yellowed notebooks. Robert picked one up and began flipping through it. The handwriting was neat, and the notes were far too detailed to be the work of an amateur. "Who was your grandfather again?" Robert asked as he read. "William Thomas Brown. Everyone called him Old Bill," Jason answered, pride in his voice. The name made Robert choke. Old Bill was a legend among the mechanics in the area. The man had an almost supernatural knack for fixing engines others considered beyond repair. Robert had never met him in person, but had heard plenty of stories. "Your grandfather was Old Bill from the downtown auto shop on Oak Street," Robert asked, skeptical. Yeah, did you know him? Not personally, but I've heard a lot. He was considered the best mechanic in town. People said he had a gift. Robert flipped through a few more notebooks. Wow, these notes are incredibly detailed. Jason smiled for the first time since arriving at the shop. Grandma Betty always says I take after him, says I have the same hands and patience. Robert kept reading. The techniques described were advanced, some he'd never even seen before. The gradual cooling method was laid out step by step, with precise diagrams and observations. Jason, even if I wanted to try this, I don't have all the equipment here at the shop. Robert pointed to a list of materials in the notebook. We can improvise. My grandpa always said a good mechanic works miracles with little, the boy replied confidently. Robert looked back at the mangled engine. In any other situation, he'd tell the customer to find another car. But he'd known Grandma Betty for years, was aware of the family's financial struggles, and now he'd learned the boy was the grandson of a mechanic legend. All right, let's give it a shot. But if it doesn't work, no crying, Robert finally agreed. Jason's eyes lit up with joy. I won't cry, Mr. Johnson. We'll make it work. Robert started gathering the necessary tools, while Jason studied the diagrams in the notebook. The boy had impressive focus for his age, memorizing every detail of the technique. First, we need to clean everything really well, Jason instructed, reading from the notes. My grandpa said half the success is in the cleaning. They spent the next hour meticulously cleaning each part. Robert was amazed by the boy's skill. His small hands could reach tight spots, and he seemed to have a natural instinct for the work. Jason, how'd you learn all this so fast? Robert asked as they worked. I've always liked tinkering with broken things. Ever since I was little, I'd take toys apart to see how they worked inside. Grandma Betty scolds me, but I always manage to put them back together, the boy answered without pausing. What about your parents? Do they know you're messing with engines? Jason's face turned serious for a moment. My dad lives in New York now, has a new family there. My mum's in Chicago with her boyfriend. They send money sometimes, but they don't really care what I do. Robert felt a pang in his chest. He had 2 kids around Jason's age and couldn't imagine leaving them with their grandmother to start over. But you've got your grandma. She takes good care of you. Robert tried to soften the mood. Grandma Betty is the best person in the world. She does everything to give me what I need. That's why I need to help her too. Jason spoke with a maturity that touched Robert deeply. They continued working in silence for a while longer. Robert called his wife, explaining he'd be home late, and she understood when he told her about Mrs. Miller's situation. Now comes the hard part, Jason said, pointing to a specific section of the notebook. We need to heat the parts to a specific temperature and then cool them down gradually. Robert looked at the makeshift setup they'd assembled. It wasn't ideal, but it might work if they were lucky and careful. Are you sure you want to risk it? If it goes wrong, we could end up ruining what's still good, Robert asked one last time. Mr. Rob, without this car, my grandma can't work. She's already behind on the house rent. If we don't try, she'll lose everything anyway, Jason said, his eyes welling up. Robert hadn't known that. Grandma Betty had always been too proud to ask for help, but the situation was worse than he'd imagined. Then let's do it. But you do exactly as I say, deal? Deal. They began the delicate process of heating the parts. Robert controlled the temperature while Jason timed it carefully, following the notebook's instructions to the letter. Now we let it cool for exactly 15 minutes, Jason said, checking his grandfather's notes. While they waited, Robert took the chance to get to know the boy better. Do you plan on being a mechanic when you grow up? I want to finish school first. Grandma Betty always says education is important. But yeah, I really like working with engines, Jason replied. Did your grandfather leave anything else besides the notebooks? The boy's face grew sad. He disappeared overnight. No one ever really explained what happened. My grandma Betty doesn't like talking about it. She just says he was a good man but had problems she couldn't help with. Robert realized it was a sensitive topic and didn't press further. Every family had its secrets and its pain. The waiting time ended, and they moved on to the second phase of the process. Everything was going well until Robert heard a strange noise from the engine. "Stop everything!" he shouted, quickly shutting off the equipment. A small wisp of smoke rose from one of the parts, and Robert was sure they'd ruined the engine for good. "Darn it! I knew this would go wrong." Robert smacked his hand on the workbench in frustration. Jason calmly stepped closer and examined the smoking part. "Mr. Rob, look here in the notebook." The boy pointed to a note at the bottom of the page. "My grandpa wrote that this could happen. It's normal." Robert read the note. "Small smoke emission in the second phase is expected. Wait 5 minutes and proceed as normal." "Your grandpa really knew his stuff," Robert murmured, impressed. They waited the 5 minutes and continued the process. This time, everything went perfectly. By the time they finished the last step, it was past 10 at night. "Now we put everything back together and hope for the best," Robert said, exhausted. The reassembly took another 2 hours. Jason helped with everything, showing an impressive ability to remember where each part went. When they finished, both were covered in oil from head to toe. "Time for the moment of truth," Robert said, turning the key. The engine made some odd noises, sputtered a few times but didn't start. "Let's try again," Jason said, not losing hope. Second attempt, third, fourth. Nothing. Robert was starting to feel discouraged, but Jason remained confident. "My grandpa wrote here that sometimes it takes up to 10 tries. The boy showed another note in the notebook. On the 8th try, the engine roared loudly and started running perfectly. The sound was clean, noiseless, like it was a brand new engine. "I can't believe it," Robert shouted with joy. "It worked!" Jason grinned from ear to ear, but his reaction was more restrained, as if he'd always known it would work. "My grandpa never made mistakes," the boy said proudly. Robert turned off the engine and looked at Jason with admiration. "Kid, you've got a gift. Your hands, your patience, your smarts. It's just like they said about your grandpa." "You really think so?" "I'm sure of it. And listen, if you want, you can come by the shop anytime. I'll teach you everything I know." Jason's eyes lit up. "Really? Really? Talent like yours shouldn't go to waste." They cleaned up the shop and got ready to leave. Robert offered him a ride, but Jason said he'd rather walk to think about everything that had happened. "Mr. Rob, thank you so much for believing in me," the boy said before leaving. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You taught me that sometimes you gotta take a chance to achieve the impossible." The next day, Robert arrived early at the shop and found Jason already waiting at the door with his grandpa's notebooks tucked under his arm. "Thought you might have forgotten about the invite," the boy said with a smile. "Didn't forget a thing. Today, you're gonna learn how to change oil the right way." Grandma Betty showed up at the shop mid-morning to pick up the car. When Robert told her everything that had happened, she hugged her grandson with tears in her eyes. "Your grandpa would have been so proud of you," she whispered in Jason's ear. "Grandma," Mr. Rob said, "I can come here any time to learn." "Of course you can, sweetheart. School always comes first, but in your free time, you're welcome here." Robert handed the keys to the Mustang to Grandma Betty, who could barely contain her emotions. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, worried. "Nothing, Grandma Betty. Your grandson did all the work. I just helped." "But, Mr. Rob..." "No arguments. Consider it an investment in the future. This boy's gonna be the best mechanic in town one day." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot when we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. In the days that followed, Jason started coming to the shop regularly after school. Robert was amazed at how quickly the boy learned. It was like he had a natural understanding of engines. One afternoon, while they were working together on changing the brakes of a Volkswagen bus, Robert decided to ask a few questions about Jason's grandpa. "Jason, do you remember your grandpa?" "I remember some things. He always smelled like motor oil and had really big hands. He'd hold me in his lap and show me his tools." "Did your grandma ever tell you why he left?" The boy stopped working and grew thoughtful. "She just says he had a problem she couldn't help with. Sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm not looking." Robert could tell it was a painful subject for the family and decided not to push. A few weeks later, Robert was organizing some old parts in the back of the shop when he found a dusty box. Inside were some old tools and yellowed papers. One of the papers caught his eye. It was a certificate for completing an automotive mechanics course in the name of William Thomas Brown, dated 40 years ago. Robert recognized the name right away. "Jason, come here a sec," he called the boy. "What is it, Mr. Rob? Look what I found in the back of the shop." Jason took the certificate and his eyes widened. "It's my grandpa's. Where'd you find this?" "It was in this old box. Must have been from when the shop's previous owner worked here." Robert examined the box more closely and found a few more papers. There were receipts for services done by William Thomas Brown, always with the careful signature that Jason had inherited. "Mr. Rob, does this mean my grandfather worked here at this auto shop?" "It seems so. This shop has been around for over 50 years. It's had several owners." Jason held the papers carefully, as if they were precious treasures. "Grandma Betty is going to be so emotional when she hears about this." That night, Robert took Jason home and told Mrs. Miller about the discovery. Her reaction wasn't what they expected. Instead of joy, her face turned pale, and she asked to speak with Robert in private. "Mr. Rob, I need to tell you something, but I ask that you don't tell Jason yet," she said quietly. "You can tell me, Mrs. Miller. William didn't leave on his own. He was arrested for something he didn't do and ended up dying in prison." Robert felt a chill. The story was far more tragic than he'd imagined. "But why didn't you ever tell Jason?" "Because he was too young at the time. And I didn't want him growing up angry or resentful. I'd rather he remembered his grandfather as a good man." "What exactly happened?" Mrs. Miller took a deep breath before answering. "The auto shop where he worked was robbed. They took expensive tools and money from the safe. Since William had the keys and knew the safe combination, he became the main suspect." "But was he innocent?" "Completely. My husband was many things, but a thief wasn't one of them. He had his flaws, drank too much sometimes, was stubborn, but he was as honest as they come." Robert stayed silent, processing the information. The problem was, he couldn't prove where he was during the robbery. Said he was home alone, sleeping after drinking. No one believed him. And who was the real thief? They never found out. William died 2 years later in prison. They said it was his heart, but I know it was from grief and injustice. Robert now understood why Mrs. Miller always avoided the subject. The pain of loss was mixed with anger over the injustice. "Do you think I should tell Jason the truth?" she asked. "I think he has a right to know, but maybe it's better to wait until he's a little older." "That's what I think too. For now, let him believe his grandfather just left. It's less painful." In the days that followed, Robert couldn't stop thinking about William's story. The injustice weighed heavily on him, especially seeing how proud Jason was of his grandfather. One afternoon, while working together, Robert decided to dig a little deeper. "Jason, do you remember the name of the auto shop where your grandfather worked?" "I think it was Downtown Auto Shop." "Why?" "Just curious." Your grandfather really was talented. Robert knew Downtown Auto Shop. It was on the other side of town and still running, now under different ownership. He decided to stop by over the weekend to talk to someone who might have known William. On Saturday morning, Robert went to Downtown Auto Shop. The current owner was an older man named Anthony, who had bought the business 15 years earlier. "William Thomas Brown, of course I remember him," Anthony said when Robert mentioned the name. "He was the best mechanic who ever worked here. A shame what happened." "Did you know him personally?" "I did. I was an apprentice here back then. William taught me half of what I know." Robert felt he was on the right track. "Do you believe he was guilty of the robbery?" Anthony laughed bitterly. "William Steele? Never. That man was too honest for his own good. He'd rather go without than take money that wasn't his." "Then who do you think did it?" "I always suspected Richard, the manager at the time. He had access to everything and knew everyone's schedules, but I never had proof. And where's this Richard today?" "He died about 10 years ago, cancer. But before he died, he acted very strange, saying confusing things. His family moved to another state soon after." Robert thanked him for the information and went home deep in thought. He knew he couldn't change the past, but at least he was sure that William Thomas Brown was truly innocent. On Monday, Jason arrived at the shop more excited than usual. "Mr. Rob, I found more of my grandpa's stuff in the attic." The boy opened a bag and pulled out some old tools and a few more notebooks. "Look at these wrenches. They're old, but so well kept," Jason said, handling the tools with care. Robert picked up one of the wrenches and was impressed by the quality. They were expensive, professional-grade tools, the kind only experienced mechanics used. "Your grandpa took good care of his tools." Grandma Betty said he always told her that tools are an extension of a mechanic's hands. You have to treat them with care. They spent the morning examining the new finds. The notebooks contained even more advanced techniques, some engine sketches, and even improvement designs William had created. "Mr. Rob, my grandpa was really smart, huh?" "Very smart. These techniques here were revolutionary for their time." Jason flipped through one of the notebooks and stopped at a specific page. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to a strange drawing. Robert looked and recognized it immediately. It was a sketch of an electronic fuel injection system, technology that only became common in cars 15 years later. "Your grandpa was way ahead of his time. This didn't become standard until much later." "Really?" "Really. He was a visionary." The more Robert learned about William through the notebooks and tools, the more he admired the man. It was clear he had exceptional talent and a brilliant mind. That afternoon, Robert had a special visitor, Mr. Joseph, a 70-year-old man who brought in an old Camaro for a checkup. "This car's been in the family for 40 years, the man explained. "A mechanic named William Thomas Brown used to take care of it, but he disappeared a long time ago." Robert and Jason exchanged glances, another connection to the boy's grandfather. "William Thomas Brown?" Robert asked. "That's the one. Did you know him?" "Not personally, but I know his grandson," Robert said, pointing to Jason. Mr. Joseph looked at the boy with surprise and emotion. "Your old Bill's grandson? My, what a joy. You knew my grandpa?" "Knew him well. He worked on my family's cars for years. Never saw a better mechanic. He'd never do anything dishonest." Jason smiled proudly, while Robert grew even more convinced of William's innocence. "Mr. Joseph, do you remember what happened to him?" The old man's face turned serious. "I do. It was a terrible injustice. They locked him up for a robbery he'd never commit. I knew William for decades. He'd give you the shirt off his back before stealing a dime from anyone." "Do you have any idea who the real culprit might have been?" "Back then, me and some other customers tried to help, but we couldn't prove anything. We always suspected the shop manager, but he had an alibi for the time of the robbery." Mr. Joseph spent the afternoon at the shop, sharing stories about William and teaching Jason some old techniques. The boy soaked up every word like a sponge. "Your grandpa had a special gift. He could diagnose problems just by listening to the engine," the man said. "I'm trying to learn that too," Jason replied. "With that blood in your veins, you'll get there." When Mr. Joseph left, he promised to return whenever his car needed work and to bring other old cars for Jason to practice on. That evening, Robert had dinner with his family and told his wife about the day's discoveries. "You're getting too involved in this story," Jennifer, his wife, observed. "It just bothers me knowing an innocent man died in prison for something he didn't do." "But that was a long time ago, Robert. You can't change the past." "I know, but at least I can make sure his grandson knows the truth when the time comes." Jennifer held her husband's hand. "You have a good heart. That's why I fell in love with you." Robert smiled. His wife always supported his decisions, even when they meant extra work or complications. "That boy reminds me so much of our Michael. Imagine if it were our son going through this. That's why you have to help, but be careful, okay? The family has already suffered enough." The following week, Robert decided to dig deeper into William Thomas Brown's case. He went to the city records office to search for old documents and found some information about the trial. The robbery had happened on a Monday morning. William was at home alone, recovering from a weekend binge. He had no solid alibi, only his mother-in-law's word. She lived on the same street and had seen a light on in his house late that night. The manager, Richard, on the other hand, claimed to be in a meeting with suppliers at the time of the crime. 3 people confirmed his story, but Robert found it suspicious that they were all commercially tied to the auto shop. The more he investigated, the more convinced he became that William had been the victim of a conspiracy. But the evidence was lost to time, and the main people involved had already passed away. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now back to the story. Robert returned home frustrated but determined to at least clear William's name in the community's memory. He decided to talk to other long-time mechanics in town to gather more testimonies about the man's character. The next day, Jason arrived at the shop with a worried expression. "Mr. Rob, Grandma Betty's been acting strange. She keeps looking through my grandpa's notebooks and then gets sad. Did you ask her what's wrong?" "I did, but she just says everything's fine, but I know it's not." Robert realized his inquiries about William were stirring up painful memories for Grandma Betty. Maybe it was time to talk openly with her about what he'd discovered. That afternoon, when Jason went to school, Robert closed the shop early and went to visit Grandma Betty. "Good afternoon, Grandma Betty. Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course, Mr. Rob. Come in, please." The house was simple but very clean and tidy. Robert noticed some old photos of William on the living room wall. "Grandma Betty, I've been talking to some people who knew your husband. Everyone speaks very highly of him." The woman's face twisted in pain. "I know you're trying to help, but sometimes it's best to leave the past alone. I understand your pain, but Jason has the right to know the truth about his grandfather." "What truth? That he died in prison wronged? That he never got to prove his innocence? How will that help the boy?" Robert realized he'd touched a deep wound. "It'll help, because he'll know his grandfather was an honest man, that he can be proud of the legacy he inherited." Grandma Betty began to cry silently. "Mr. Rob, you don't understand. I spent years trying to forget the pain of watching my husband be humiliated, judged, convicted for something he didn't do. When Jason was born, I promised he'd never go through that pain. But hiding the truth won't protect him forever. Someone will tell him eventually. Then let it be when he's grown up and can handle it better." Robert respected Grandma Betty's decision, but he kept believing that the truth was better than a lie, even if it was more painful. In the following days, Robert continued investigating discreetly. He spoke with a few more veteran mechanics and always heard the same thing. William Thomas Brown was an honest man, incapable of stealing. That's when he had an idea. What if he could gather all these testimonies in a document? It wouldn't change the past, but at least it would leave a record for posterity that William Thomas Brown was innocent. Robert started writing letters to everyone he had interviewed, asking them to put their testimonies about William's character on paper. Surprisingly, almost everyone responded positively. Within 2 weeks, Robert had a folder full of letters attesting to the honesty and professional competence of William Thomas Brown. It was like an unofficial posthumous rehabilitation. He kept the folder in a safe place, waiting for the right time to show it to Jason. Meanwhile, the boy kept learning quickly at the auto shop. His skills improved every day, and Robert was amazed by his ability to solve complex problems. One day, a case came into the shop that left Robert puzzled. A customer brought in an old Chevrolet pickup with an engine problem no mechanic in town had been able to fix. "I've taken it to 5 different shops. Everyone says it's an electrical issue, but no one can find where," the customer explained, frustrated. Robert examined the engine for 2 hours and still couldn't identify the problem. It was something very subtle, something that didn't show up in conventional tests. "Jason, come take a look at this," Robert called the boy. "What kind of problem is the engine having?" Jason asked the customer. "It runs fine in the city, but when I accelerate on the highway, it starts misfiring and losing power." Jason stayed quiet for a few minutes, just observing the engine. Then he asked Robert to start the car and rev it. "Turn it off," Jason said after a few seconds. The boy walked up to a specific part of the engine and pointed to a wire that looked perfectly normal. "The problem's right here. This wire has an internal short. It looks fine on the outside, but it's partially broken inside." Robert looked where Jason was pointing. The wire really did seem flawless externally. "How did you figure that out?" "By the sound. When you rev it, the noise changes at a specific point. It's just like a note my grandpa wrote about diagnosing by sound." Robert tested Jason's theory and found the boy was right. The wire really had an internal defect, invisible to the eye. "How is that possible?" the customer asked, amazed. "This boy has the sharpest ear I've ever seen," Robert replied proudly. The repair took only 20 minutes, and the engine ran perfectly again. The customer left the shop praising Jason's skill and promising to recommend him to friends. "Where did you learn to diagnose by sound?" Robert asked after the customer left. "In my grandpa's notebooks. He said every engine has its own voice, and when something's wrong, the voice changes." Robert shook his head in admiration. It was as if William Thomas Brown were right there, passing on his knowledge through his grandson. That night, Robert told the family about the incident over dinner. "Dad, that boy really is a genius," said Michael, Robert's son, who was the same age as Jason. "He's very special, has an amazing natural talent." "Why don't you invite him over for dinner sometime?" suggested Jennifer. "That's a great idea. I'll ask Grandma Betty if she'll allow it." That weekend, Jason had dinner at Robert's house for the first time. The boy was enchanted by the family atmosphere and got along wonderfully with Michael and Emily, Robert's children. "Uncle Robert, can Jason teach me some mechanic tricks?" Michael asked. "Of course he can, but only if his mom lets him come here more often." Jason smiled shyly. It was rare for him to interact with other families, having always lived only with his grandmother. "Jason, do you miss your parents?" Emily, 8 years old, asked with the typical frankness of children. The boy thought for a few seconds. "Sometimes I do, but Grandma Betty takes such good care of me that I almost forget they're not around." Jennifer exchanged a knowing glance with Robert. Both could see that Jason had developed a maturity beyond his years due to life's circumstances. After dinner, the kids went to play in the backyard while the adults talked. "Robert, that boy is really special," Jennifer remarked. "He is. Sometimes I forget he's only 12. You can tell he carries a weight on his shoulders. The responsibility of caring for his grandmother, the absence of his parents. That's why I think it's important to give him love and guidance. He needs a father figure around. You're doing the right thing, and our kids are learning from it too." When Robert took Jason back home, Grandma Betty thanked him for the attention he was giving her grandson. "Mr. Rob, I don't know how to thank you for everything you're doing for Jason." "No need to thank me, Grandma Betty. That boy is special, anyone can see that. He's so happy working at the shop, comes home talking about nothing else. He's got real talent. With time and dedication, he could become one of the best mechanics around. Just like his father," Grandma Betty murmured softly, forgetting for a moment that she always referred to William Thomas Brown as his grandfather. Robert noticed the slip but said nothing. Every family had its own way of dealing with loss and secrets. The following Monday, Jason arrived at the shop more excited than usual. "Mr. Rob, something amazing happened yesterday." "What was it?" "A man showed up at our door asking for Grandma Betty. He said he knew my grandfather and wanted to meet me." Robert grew curious. "And who was this man?" "He introduced himself as Master Jim. Said he worked with my grandfather a long time ago and is setting up a shop specializing in classic cars." The name Master Jim was familiar to Robert. He was a legendary mechanic, even more respected than William Thomas Brown had been. "What did he want?" "He looked through my grandfather's notebooks and was really impressed. Said my grandfather was a genius and that I should continue his studies." "That's true, but there's more. He said he knows the truth about what happened to my grandfather in prison." Robert's heart raced. Maybe someone could finally shed light on what really happened. "And what did he say?" "He said he'd only tell me when I'm older, but he swore my grandfather was innocent and that he has proof." "Proof?" "He said back then he couldn't speak up because he feared for his own safety, but now that so many people have died, he can tell the truth." Robert was restless at the possibility of finally uncovering the truth. "Did he say when he'd come back?" "He said he'd talk to Grandma Betty first, wants to make sure she agrees to me knowing the truth." That afternoon, Robert couldn't focus on work. His mind was fixed on the chance to finally clear William's name. When Jason left for school, Robert decided to stop by Grandma Betty's house to talk about Master Jim. "Grandma Betty," Jason told me about yesterday's visit. The woman's face turned pale. Mr. Robb, I don't know what to do. Jim said he has proof of William Thomas Brown's innocence, but he also said the truth is more painful than I can imagine. What kind of pain could be worse than injustice? He said my husband didn't die a natural death in prison, that he was murdered because he was about to uncover who was really behind the robbery. Robert felt a chill. The story was even more tragic than he'd thought. But that's all the more reason to clear everything up. William deserves justice, even if it's late. I know, Mr. Robb, but I'm afraid this might draw the attention of dangerous people. What if whoever killed my husband is still alive? Robert understood Grandma Betty's fear. If there really was a murder involved, digging up the past could be dangerous. Are you going to let Master Jim tell Jason the truth? I haven't decided yet. I need to think carefully. Robert returned to the auto shop with his mind racing. The story was getting more complicated and dangerous by the minute. When Jason came back from school, Robert decided to have a serious talk with him. Jason, are you sure you want to know the whole truth about your grandfather? Yes, I am. Why does everyone keep asking me that? Because sometimes the truth can hurt more than a lie. Mr. Robb, I'm not a kid anymore. I know my grandfather didn't leave by choice. I know something bad happened to him. Robert was surprised by the maturity in his answer. How do you know that? Because I pay attention. Grandma Betty never speaks ill of my grandfather, but she also never says why he left. And whenever someone mentions his name, she gets too sad for it to just be missing him. Robert realized Jason was more observant and sharp than anyone had guessed. Are you ready to find out your grandfather might have suffered a terrible injustice? I already figured that much. My grandfather was too good a man to just abandon his family. So you want me to talk to your grandma and let Master Jim tell you everything? Yes, I do. I need to know the truth, even if it hurts. That night, Robert went back to Grandma Betty's house, this time with Jason. Grandma, I want to know what happened to my grandfather, Jason said directly. My boy, you're too young to carry this weight. Grandma, I'm already carrying the weight of not knowing. It's worse to live with doubts than with bad truths. Grandma Betty looked at her grandson and saw in his eyes the same determination William had. All right, tomorrow I'll talk to Jim and set up a meeting, but promise me you won't do anything reckless after you hear the truth. I promise, Grandma. And you, Mr. Robb, promise you'll look after my grandson if I can't anymore. The question confused Robert. What do you mean, Grandma Betty? Jim warned me that once the truth comes out, Jason and I might have to leave town for safety. Robert felt the weight of her words. The situation was more serious than he'd realized. If it comes to that, Jason can stay with me as long as needed. Thank you, Mr. Robb. You've been an angel to our family. The next morning, Grandma Betty called Master Jim and set up a meeting for that afternoon. Robert closed the shop early to go with Jason. Master Jim arrived promptly at 3. He was a man nearing 80, thin, with white hair and eyes that still sparkled with life. His hands, marked by decades of work, trembled slightly, but his voice was steady and clear. Jason, are you sure you want to hear what I have to say? The old mechanic asked first. Yes, I am, Mr. Jim. Then sit down, because it's a long story. Master Jim began by saying he'd worked with William at the downtown auto shop for 15 years. They were close friends and work partners. Your grandfather was the best mechanic I ever saw in my life. He had a natural talent that seemed like it came from another world. And what happened at the time of the theft? Jason asked. Oh, my boy, that was the greatest injustice I ever witnessed. Your grandfather wouldn't have stolen a bolt if his life depended on it. Master Jim explained that around the time of the theft, he'd noticed some strange behavior from the manager, Richard. Richard had been acting real jumpy in the weeks before the robbery, and I noticed he was taking tools home, claiming he had some side jobs to do. Didn't you suspect something? Robert asked. I sure did, but I never imagined he'd rob his own shop. Thought he was just sneaking a few things out without permission. Then why didn't you speak up back then? Master Jim's face darkened. Because Richard threatened me. Said if I said a word, he'd make it look like I was in on it too. But you had people who could vouch for your character. Didn't matter. Richard had friends on the police force. It'd be his word against mine. Master Jim went on to say he tried to help William Thomas during the trial, but couldn't prove anything. Your grandfather asked me to look after his family if anything happened to him. I promised, but you all vanished from town soon after. My grandma moved here right after he was locked up, Jason explained. That's right. When I heard William Thomas had died in prison, I tried to find you, but I couldn't. And how did my grandfather die? Jason asked, even though he knew the answer would hurt. Master Jim glanced at Grandma Betty, who nodded. Your grandfather didn't die of natural causes, boy. He was murdered. The room fell silent. Jason swallowed hard but kept his composure. Who killed him? I can't say for sure, but I've got strong suspicions. Master Jim explained he'd gotten information from an ex-con who'd known William Thomas in prison. According to this man, your grandfather had been digging around on his own, trying to find out who framed him. He was close to the truth when they found him dead in his cell. And what happened to Richard after? Richard sold his share of the shop soon after William Thomas died and moved to another city. Lived well for a few years but died of cancer a decade ago. So there'll never be justice? Jason asked, his voice tight with anger. Full justice? Maybe not. But the truth is coming out now, and you can be sure your grandfather was an honorable man who fell victim to a terrible coward. Master Jim pulled an envelope from his jacket's inner pocket. I've got some letters here your grandfather wrote in prison that never got delivered. A friendly guard managed to hold on to them and gave them to me years later. Jason took the envelope with trembling hands. There were 3 letters, one for Grandma Betty, one for his father, and one for Jason himself, who'd just been a baby at the time. You can read it now if you want, or later at home. Take your time, Master Jim said kindly. Jason decided to read his letter right then and there. With tears in his eyes, he read aloud, My dear grandson Jason, if you're reading this, it means the truth has finally come out. I want you to know your grandfather was always an honest man who fought to the end to prove his innocence. I know you're still young, but I hope when you grow up, you'll be proud to carry my name and my blood. I worked on cars all my life, but my greatest treasure was always my family. Be a good man, study, work with honesty, and never let the injustice done to me turn your heart bitter. I love you, my grandson, even though I never got to watch you grow. Your grandfather, William Thomas Brown. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Jason cried for the first time since Robert had known him, releasing years of pent-up doubts and pain. Your grandfather was truly a special man, Master Jim said, and you inherited the best of him. After Master Jim left, Robert stayed talking with Grandma Betty and Jason about what to do with the information. Grandma, now I understand why you always avoided talking about this, but I'm happy to know the truth. And what about you, son? Aren't you angry? I'm angry at whoever hurt my grandpa, but I'm not sad. Now I know he really was a good man. Robert admired Jason's maturity in handling such a heavy revelation. So now, are you staying here in town? Robert asked. Master Jim said there's no more danger. Everyone involved has already passed away. But he made it clear it's better not to spread the story to everyone, Grandma Betty explained. I just want some people to know my grandpa was innocent. Not everyone, but the people who matter to me, Jason said. Robert remembered the folder with the testimonies he had gathered. Jason, I have a surprise for you. What surprise? When we get home today, I'll show you something that'll make you even prouder of your grandpa. That night, Robert showed Jason the folder with all the letters and testimonies he had collected about William Thomas Brown. Mr. Rob, you did all this? I did, because I believe the truth always deserves to be preserved. Jason read each letter carefully, learning a little more about his grandpa's personality and character through the accounts. Now I understand why I love working with engines so much. It's in my blood. And you'll be even better than your grandpa. You have the same natural talent, but you'll have opportunities he didn't. Mr. Rob, do you think I could work at your shop until I finish school? Of course you can. In fact, I have a proposal for you and your grandma. What proposal? How about we expand the shop, create a section specialized in classic cars? You'd be my junior partner. Jason's eyes lit up. Really? Really? With your talent and your grandpa's knowledge, we can create something unique in the area. Grandma Betty, who had just arrived, heard the proposal and got emotional. Mr. Rob, are you sure about this? I am. Jason is special, and talent like his shouldn't be wasted. But he still needs to study, finish high school. Of course, he'll work part-time, after school and on weekends. Studies always come first. Jason hugged Robert tightly. Thank you so much for everything, Mr. Rob. You changed my life. No, Jason, you changed mine. You reminded me why I fell in love with mechanics as a kid. In the following months, Robert's shop grew significantly. The classic car section became a regional reference, and Jason developed a reputation as a mechanical prodigy. Mr. Joseph brought in several collector friends, and soon the shop had a special clientele specifically seeking Jason's services. That boy has the same gift as his grandpa, the older customers would say. Robert watched Jason's progress with pride. The boy had grown not just in technical skill, but also in confidence and maturity. One day Jason came to the shop with a different idea. Mr. Rob, I want to start a special project. What kind of project? I want to fully restore a classic car using only the techniques my grandpa developed. That would be amazing. What car do you have in mind? A Mustang just like Grandma Betty's. I want to show that my grandpa's techniques still work. Robert loved the idea. They started looking for a beat-up Mustang to serve as the base for the project. They found a perfect specimen, a 1980 Mustang completely wrecked, which would be ideal for a full restoration. Let's make this project last the whole year. That way you'll learn every detail, Robert suggested. Perfect. And when it's done, I'll gift it to Grandma Betty. The restoration project became a highlight at the shop. Customers would stop by to check the progress, and many offered help with parts and materials. Jason documented every step of the restoration in a notebook, following his grandfather's example. His notes were detailed and included precise sketches of each procedure. You're creating your own technical manual, Robert observed. I just want to record everything I learn. My grandpa did this, and thanks to him I've learned so much. Months later, when the restoration was nearly complete, Jason got an unexpected visitor at the shop. Excuse me, I'm looking for Jason Brown, said a man in his 40s at the shop's entrance. That's me, can I help you? My name is William Brown. I'm your father. Silence filled the shop. Robert stopped what he was doing and watched the scene. My father? Jason asked, surprised. Yes. I know it's been a long time, and I know you have every right to be angry with me. But I needed to see you. Jason looked at Robert, seeking guidance. Do you want me to give you two some privacy? Robert asked. No, Mr. Rob, you can stay. You've been more of a father to me than the man who abandoned me. The words stung William, but he understood his son's resentment. Jason, I know I made mistakes, but I want to explain why I left. You don't need to explain anything. You made your choice a long time ago. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Jason agreed to listen, more out of curiosity than a desire to reconcile. William explained that he had married too young, wasn't ready to be a father, and when marital problems arose, he didn't know how to handle it. When my father was arrested, I panicked. I couldn't deal with the shame, the gossip, the pressure of providing for the family. So you ran away, Jason said coldly. I did, and I've regretted it every day since. And what do you want now? I want to make up for lost time. I want to be a real father to you. Jason looked at the man before him. Physically, they resembled each other, but he felt no emotional connection. You lost the right to be my father when you left me. Now I have a family who loves and supports me. William glanced at Robert, understanding the reference. I don't want to take you away from the life you've built here. I just want to be part of it. Why now? Why after all this time? Because I learned the truth about my father. I found out he was innocent. and it made me realize how much I've missed out on because of pride and fear. Jason was surprised his father had heard the story. How did you find out? Master Jim reached out to me. He said it was important I knew the truth and that you'd become an exceptional mechanic. And what does that change? It changes everything. Now I understand my father was an honorable man, and you're on the right path. I want to support that. Robert silently observed the conversation, respecting the moment between father and son. Jason, the decision is yours. But remember, everyone deserves a second chance, Robert said gently. Jason thought for a few minutes before responding. Fine. You can stop by the shop sometimes, but don't expect me to call you Dad. And Grandma Betty is still my priority. I understand and respect that. Thank you for the opportunity. William began visiting the shop regularly on weekends. At first, their conversations were formal and tense, but over time, a cordial relationship developed. Robert noticed that Jason was growing even more mature through the situation. The boy had learned to separate his personal grievances from the possibility of having an adult relationship with his father. You're handling all of this really well, Robert remarked one day. Well, I learned from my grandfather's story that holding on to grudges only hurts us in the end. My dad made mistakes, but he's trying to make things right now. That's a very mature lesson for someone your age. I had good teachers, Jason smiled, looking at Robert. The restoration of the Mustang was finally completed by the end of the year. The car looked flawless, with every detail restored, following William Thomas Brown's techniques. On the day it was delivered to Grandma Betty, the whole community gathered at the auto shop. Master Jim had come especially to see the finished work. Jason, your grandfather would be so proud of you, the old mechanic said, inspecting every detail of the restored car. When Grandma Betty saw the Mustang, she burst into tears. My grandson, what a wonderful gift. It's so you never have to worry about a broken car again, Grandma. Even William was present at the ceremony, watching his son with visible pride. Jason, I know I don't have the right, but I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become, he said. Thank you, Jason replied, without coldness for the first time. Robert gave a short speech to those gathered. Today, we're not just handing over a restored car. We're celebrating talent, dedication, and honesty. Jason has proven that his grandfather's legacy is alive and strong. The celebration lasted late into the night. The auto shop was filled with friends, customers, and family, celebrating not just the completion of the project, but also Jason's journey of overcoming hardships. End of story. What a touching story, isn't it? Now tell us what you thought of Jason's journey and how you felt discovering the truth about William Thomas Brown. Do you believe Jason made the right decisions in dealing with his father's return? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.